Good evening. Tonight we're going to talk about media literacy and how to set it up. These standards are coming from the Washington Educational Technology Standards, grades 9 through 12. An overview. Goal of this presentation is just to get a few ideas of ways to analyze media messages and have students uh, be able to use them and dissect from them to become responsible digital citizens. So first thing we got to do is get the students to buy in. We got to make sure that everyone can agree that we can steer away from cynicism and steer towards healthy skepticism. With just about everything now, we have to look at it with a healthy view of skepticism to make sure we're looking at facts. So, what are some things we should agree on before we engage in media literacy? What types of misinformation and how does it spread? Are there algorithms to help set up misinformation? Students don't always get to practice analyzing. Uh, we should allow them time to look at things to get them used to looking and seeing how things can be broken down and make sure that they are aware of what's going on. All information sources need to be evaluated. We need to be able to look and see what students are seeing and teach them how to dissect them and help students understand how they got there. Where did they come up with their plan or their way of thinking? What questions can be asked to develop intellectual curiosity? How can we plan for answering questions? We need to evaluate all sources. We need to show the students that they need to look at references and find out where the information came from. Find out if that source is reliable. Learn how to identify experts. There's all kinds of experts out there on everything, but not everybody's a true expert. Who's responsible for the information? Where did it come from? Is it a credible link or source? And how do we determine if it's a credible source? Where do we find the information that helps us determine that? So, fact checking. So, we need to learn objectives that explore emotion. We don't have to check every media message. Some of them are factual, some of them are not. But again, we need to go back to the healthy skepticism. We need to thoughtfully analyze each message. What are we looking for that indicate message need to be checked? Are there clues that are too good to be true or something to that extent? How do we use the corroborating information? Do we find where people are have different views or different sources of their information? How do we make claims to support our evidence? Perspectives and bias. Perspectives are defined as filters through which we interpret information. So this is how we look at things and determine what our bias is on or our perspective is on. How do we look at things? And bias is distortion of that filter. So we may go too far one way or the other and hold a confirmation bias that it suggests that we have confirmed just by a little bit of the information that it goes along with what we believe. How can we identify perspective and bias in media messages? How can we respond with perspectives that are different than our own? And how do the algorithms expect or affect perspectives? Throughout the rest of the PowerPoint, we'll look at the different sections like we just talked about, and we'll label the standards that they came from the Washington State Social Studies. So again, we're going to talk about establishing a shared understanding of terms and definitions as part of our foundation. Understand that disagreements can be about facts, definitions, or values. Not everybody agrees on every point. Misinformation. How do we analyze how misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda have had an impact? Describe how to decide who to trust and explain benefits of healthy skepticism. Again, the standards come from Washington State Social Studies standards. Inquiry. Make a plan for continuing to seek new knowledge in order to fill gaps while practicing intellectual curiosity. Evaluating information sources. Identify the person or organization actually responsible for the information in a media message. How do we recognize that expertise can show up in different ways and identify criteria for authority that perpetuates systems of power? Fact checking. Practice recognizing emotional responses to media messages and other red flags before sharing them. Recognize when a story about a scientific study is being misrepresented. Again, standards there came from the state science standards, Washington State science standards. And then we move on to perspective and bias. Compare the techniques used by different organizations that rate information sources for bias and credibility. Analyze how objectivity is defined and who usually gets to define it. Reference. This framework was created by Washington State Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, Media Literacy, and Digital Citizenship.